The snow was relentless. It fell in thick sheets, obscuring everything in its path, burying the world in white. We had been traveling for days, searching for the last trace of game before winter made hunting impossible. Now, we were lost. The blizzard had come without warning, sweeping through the forest like a vengeful spirit, blinding us, scattering us from one another. There were 5 of us, but now I could only see 3 shapes huddled close, their forms swallowed by the storm. We had to stay together. If we didn't, the wilderness would claim us. I shouted their names, but the wind swallowed my voice. My breath fogged the air, freezing as soon as it escaped my lips. One of the men, a tall, broad figure I recognized as William, turned to me, his face pale beneath the ice clinging to his beard. His eyes, wide and wild, locked onto mine, and for a moment I thought I saw fear flicker there, but that couldn't be right. William wasn't the kind of man who scared easily. "Keep moving!" I yelled over the howling wind. "We can't stop here!" We pressed forward, the cold biting through our furs, our limbs heavy with exhaustion. The world around us was nothing but an endless expanse of snow and skeletal trees. I could no longer tell where we were or where we were going. Every step felt like a battle against the earth itself. Then we saw it, a shadow through the snow, large and looming. My heart skipped a beat as I reached for my rifle, the cold metal biting into my fingers. But as we drew closer, I realized it wasn't an animal or some malevolent creature lurking in the storm. It was a cabin. Relief washed over me as we approached the structure, the wood creaking under the weight of the snow. The door hung slightly ajar, swaying with the wind. Inside, it was dark and silent. I could feel the others gathering behind me, their breaths ragged, clouding the air. I stepped forward and pushed the door open. The creak of the hinges sent a shiver down my spine, a sound too loud in the oppressive silence. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of rot and decay. I felt my stomach turn as I stepped over the threshold, rifle ready. The cabin was small, just one room, with a table in the center and a fireplace that had long since gone cold. In the far corner there was a bed, a rough, makeshift thing of furs and straw. But it wasn't empty. A body lay there, twisted in a grotesque position, its face frozen in a rictus of terror. "God," William muttered behind me. The others filed in, their eyes wide, faces pale as they took in the scene. The body, what was left of it, was gnawed down to the bone in places, stripped clean. Something had been feeding on it, but it wasn't just that. The skin, it was torn, shredded, as if by claws. "We need to get out of here," another of the men whispered, his voice trembling. But where could we go? The blizzard raged outside, and this cabin was the only shelter we had. There was no choice. We would have to stay here, at least until the storm passed. We moved the body, laying it outside in the snow. No one wanted to touch it longer than necessary. Then we gathered around the cold hearth, trying to spark some life back into the frozen wood. But the flames were weak, and the cabin never seemed to warm. I kept glancing toward the door, half expecting something to come bursting through, but nothing did. The hours passed, slow and torturous. No one spoke much after that. We just sat in the silence, listening to the wind howl and the trees groan under the weight of the snow. But then, as the night deepened, the sounds changed. It started as a low growl, just on the edge of hearing, carried by the wind. At first, I thought it was the storm playing tricks on my mind. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. The others heard it too. We all froze, straining to listen. It was a voice unlike any I had ever heard. Low, guttural, inhuman. It whispered through the walls, threading its way into our minds. I couldn't understand the words, but they filled me with a deep, primal fear. The kind of fear that makes your blood run cold and your heart pound in your ears. William stood up suddenly, his face pale, eyes wide with terror. "We're not alone," he whispered. Before anyone could react, the door burst open with a force that sent a gust of freezing air through the cabin. The fire flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. I fumbled for my rifle, my hands shaking. And then I saw it, just for a moment in the dim light. A figure standing in the doorway, tall, gaunt, with eyes that gleamed like fire in the darkness. Its mouth twisted into a cruel, unnatural smile, and its hands, they weren't hands. They were claws, sharp and dripping with blood. The Wendigo. And then it was gone, swallowed by the storm. But the door remained open, the wind howling through and the whispers. They were louder now, echoing in my skull, filling me with a dread I had never known. William took off running into the snow, screaming something unintelligible. The others shouted after him, but I knew there was no saving him. He was lost, and soon we would be too. But the worst part was, in that moment, as I watched him disappear into the storm, I could feel it, deep inside me. That whispering voice. It wasn't just in my mind anymore. It was something more, something hungry. The wind slammed the door shut with a thunderous bang, rattling the walls of the cabin. The darkness settled back around us like a shroud, thick and suffocating. My breath came in short, panicked bursts, and my heart pounded so loudly that it drowned out the storm outside. The others were just as terrified, huddled together in the corner, eyes wide with the same realization that gripped my mind. William was gone. The Wendigo had claimed him, and we were next. For a long moment, no one spoke. We just listened to the wind howling outside, the distant whispers still echoing in our ears. But something was different now, something more sinister in the air. The storm wasn't just wind and snow anymore. It felt alive, as if the wilderness itself was conspiring against us. "We have to get out of here," one of the men finally muttered, his voice barely a whisper. His eyes darted toward the door, but none of us moved. We all knew what waited out there. "We can't survive the storm," another said, his voice shaking. "We're trapped." The fire had died completely, leaving us in utter darkness. I reached for a match, my fingers trembling, and managed to strike a flame. The tiny light flickered in the oppressive gloom, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. For a moment, it was almost comforting, almost. But then something moved. I froze, holding the match aloft, the flame casting a dim glow across the cabin. One of the shadows had shifted, not just in the way the light flickered, but in a deliberate, purposeful way. My eyes scanned the room, but there was nothing there. Nothing that I could see, at least. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if they were coming from inside the walls themselves. The others heard it too. One of the men, Thomas, clutched his head, his face twisted in pain. "Do you hear it?" he whispered hoarsely. It's inside my head. It's telling me to... Oh, God!" I tried to calm him, but before I could say a word, he let out a blood-curdling scream and lunged for the door. He flung it open and ran into the storm, disappearing into the swirling snow. His scream echoed through the night, then abruptly cut off, leaving only the howling wind behind. We were down to 3 now. The air in the cabin was thick with dread, an oppressive force that made it hard to breathe. The Wendigo was out there, stalking us, waiting for the right moment to strike. But something else was gnawing at me, something I couldn't shake. The voice, it wasn't just the Wendigo, it was something more. Something ancient, something evil that had been here long before we set foot in this cursed wilderness. And then I remembered the stories, the ones the elders used to tell around the fire back when I was a boy. Stories of the Wendigo, yes, but also of the curse that came with it. The Wendigo wasn't just a beast, it was a spirit, a malevolent force that fed on fear and desperation. And once it marked you, there was no escape. It would worm its way into your mind, turn you against your own flesh and blood. The others looked at me, eyes wide with terror, as if they could sense what I was thinking. I knew I had to say something, but what? There was no hope now, no escape. Suddenly, the cabin shuddered, and we heard it. A low, guttural growl just outside the door. The air went still, the whispers silencing, as if whatever was out there was listening, waiting for us to make the next move. My hand tightened on the rifle, but I knew it wouldn't help. You can't kill something that isn't really there. Then the door burst open, and the Wendigo lunged into the room. Its eyes burned like embers in the darkness, its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. The stench of rot and death filled the air as it moved toward us, its claws outstretched, reaching for flesh. We fired. Again and again, the sound of gunshots echoed through the cabin, but it didn't stop. It didn't even flinch. The bullets passed through it as if it were made of smoke, and I realized then that we were already dead. One of the men screamed, his voice cut short as the Wendigo tore into him, ripping him apart with a sickening crunch of bone and flesh. The other tried to run, but the creature was faster, dragging him down and feasting on him in the same horrific way. And then it turned to me. I stumbled back, tripping over a broken chair, the rifle slipping from my grasp. The Wendigo loomed over me, its breath hot and rancid as it leaned closer. I could see every detail of its twisted face, the sharp teeth stained with blood, the eyes that burned with a terrible hunger. But it didn't strike. It just stared at me, its gaze boring into my soul, and I understood. The voice, the whispers, they weren't the Wendigo's. They were mine. Because I was the Wendigo. The realization hit me like a hammer. The curse had taken hold long before the storm, long before we found this cabin. The hunger, the madness. It had been growing inside me for days, and now there was nothing left but the beast. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Only the Wendigo's laughter echoed in my mind, filling the emptiness that had once been my humanity. The last thing I saw before everything went black was my reflection in the creature's eyes, twisted and monstrous, a perfect mirror of the nightmare I had become. And then the world went silent.